Hello, Scream Team. Do you want to play a game? Well, here's a little game you can play with Zach as he rates 9 killers from all the Scream films. Now, you can subscribe and like and comment with your own rankings. But you're here to play with Zach right now, and so am I. So, we'll see what happens at the end of this little game, shall we? Now here's Zach.
Alright, firstly, huge thank you to Mr. Ghostface himself, Roger L. Jackson, for introducing this video. But also, I just wanted to point out that I have ranked the Ghostface killers in the past. That was one of the first videos I ever recorded for this channel. But since we have some new ones to add to the lot, I figured it was high time for an update. So if you have seen that one and you notice some inconsistencies in my ranking, just know that when I did that video, I tried to be as analytical as possible. This time, I'm just purely being biased. So with that said, let's get started in 9th place with Charlie Walker. I do kind of want to run through the pros and cons of each killer, so I'll start off by saying the good things about them. I think that Charlie does deserve some credit for being crafty with, kind of his kills, or just, sort of the way he sets them up. This isn't made entirely clear in the finished movie, but we know from an early draft of Scream 4 that the Ghostface that we see on the back porch when Sydney and Kate go to run out is actually not Ghostface, but a Ghostface costume that was strung up, which makes sense why it would seem like there was 2 of them there, because he purposefully did that because he knew that they would run to the front door. So that was very clever, and I think that he deserves credit for that. Also, if we're going off of my Who Killed Who in Scream 4 findings, which for me is personally headcanon, I'm gonna say that Charlie killed all of the people in that movie, except for obviously Trevor, which we see Jill do. So it does give him a relatively higher body count than most of the killers, but the reason why I put him in last place is because I believe that he has the weakest motive, just based on the fact that he's doing it to get the girl. So it just makes him a little bit more immature than most of the other killers on this list, because I wouldn't really classify him as being psychotic or anything. He's just kind of disturbed. But on that note, it is kind of cathartic for me as an audience member to see him get hoisted by his own petard, because he was so cocky throughout the movie, and that he wasn't wise enough to see that Jill was turning the tables on him and was ultimately going to dispose of him when she didn't need him anymore. So that just made it seem like, he had no business being a Ghostface killer. He doesn't even get the killer comes back for one last scare surprise, which further proves that, he's not really a killer. He's more so just a victim. And that's mostly what it comes down to. I feel that Charlie is the worst Ghostface because he is a victim himself. Sure, we've seen other Ghostface killers turn on each other, but this one really felt like, he was in way over his head. And he was also just really emotional. You could tell that he was cracking already when he could barely bring himself to kill Kirby, which, now we know isn't canon, so he didn't actually kill her either. In 8th place for me is going to be Amber Freeman. Again, to just touch on some more positive aspects of each killer, I think that Amber has probably the most shocking, or not even shocking, but just abrupt killer reveals. That moment, it really catches you off guard. I know it echoes Billy's from the original, but I feel like it was done a lot more spectacularly here. We also see with Amber that she's very scrappy, and not to say that the other killers aren't, but she keeps going. She's like the Energizer Bunny of the Ghostface killers, because she gets killed 3 times in this movie. And that's another thing. I think that Amber has one of the best deaths out of any of the killers. I know that that's not by any doing of her own, but it still makes for a very entertaining watch. And then as one more positive, which kind of goes hand in hand with Richie, is that these two had probably the strongest partnership. There was no indication that either one was going to betray the other. They were really working cohesively together. It didn't necessarily work in their benefit, but I think that the strength in numbers idea is really smart, especially seeing as how any of the other partnerships throughout the franchise normally kill each other before they've made sure to kill Sydney or whoever the person is at the end. But that'll kind of bring me to the cons of Amber. It's just the fact that she's a very sloppy and and unorganized killer. Like, despite the fact that, you know, they had every attempt to kill Sydney, Gale, Sam, and Tara, they like monumentally failed at doing it, which kind of speaks to the level in which, you know, both of them really underestimated their victims. But I think that the problem with Amber and Richie, by extension, is that she has a very weak motive. And I've mentioned in my review for Scream 5 how I felt that that was the point of these killers and the movie. That's what they were going for. So I don't really fault the movie for that. But I mean, as a Ghostface killer, I'm going to rank her lower because besides being like really incompetent when like setting out to like go on this killing spree that they went on, they were also really poorly prepared. And I'll talk about that more when I get to Richie's placement, but I just think that, you know, the two of them together, it just felt like these were amateur killers. There's also all that back and forth of her, I guess, like pleading for mercy, which I mean, like could have been a tactic to stall for time because we saw that, you know, she kind of took it back and then like pleaded for mercy again. But that also brings her down to like a level of Charlie of just being like too emotionally weak to, you know, be a killer. In 7th place, I have Roman Bridger. Now, I think the biggest point that tips the scales in Roman's favor is that he was the only one who did this all on his own. It made Scream 3 a little bit more unbelievable because of that, but I mean, still just based on the merits of each killer, you have to give him credit to the fact that he has the highest body count. Yeah, he's not as creative with his kills as compared to the other Ghostface, but again, that's more so due to Scream 3 and the censorship at the time, so I'm not gonna fault him for that. I don't know if like this is really a pro or a con, but you know, he is kind of like the Tony Stark of the Ghostface killers, like having this like technology that does not even exist where he can mimic anyone's voice. So I guess like that's a point in his favor. I'm not really sure. It's definitely a point against Scream 3, but I don't think that Roman should have to be blamed for that necessarily. And also, out of all the killers, he comes the closest to defeating Sydney. Like there was a moment there where it felt like, you know, he was actually going to kill her. And, you know, like all of the other killers, Roman does have his big monologue, but I feel that like where they are easily distracted while they're expositing whatever their evil plan is, Roman is like he's ready to get down to business and start killing her. But to get to the cons now, because there's a lot of them with Roman, is just the fact that, first of all, he has no scenes with Sydney at all during any point in the movie. So it kind of makes his reveal like cheapened in that way, because it's like, who the hell are you? I also think that as a character throughout the entire movie, all of his scenes were just like this slapstick, played for laughs sort of thing. Like he just came off as a really goofy character, which had no context to anything that was going on in the movie. It was just kind of like, here's another character and he's in the movie. And that kind of made it as though the killer reveal in the end could have been anyone. Like it could have been Parker Posey. It just really spoke to the level of which this movie like did not prepare for how they wrote the characters into the story. You know, and I know you can make the same argument for Mrs. Loomis and Sydney and Scream 2, but the fact is that those characters had history and she recognized her right away. So with Roman, it was like, not only did he not share any screen time with her, but he had also never met her before. So it all just felt really forced. I also think that his plan on like how he was gonna get away with it was really weak. Like it didn't really have any legs. His whole thing was to frame Sydney for everything. And I don't see how that ever would have worked. I mean, I know that Sydney is like hiding away in the mountains, but I feel that like she would at least have an alibi in the fact that, you know, she's been working, she works at a call center, they would know where the calls were like going to and from, just to know where she was at the time of like several of the murders. He just didn't plant enough evidence that would have like justifiably made her a suspect in the end. Like outside of the recording that they would have found on Milton's answering machine and just like the whole like voice changer thing. Cause you know, at that point, you have to remember that Gale and Dewey were still alive. And this is another flaw in his plan, that he kept them alive, because he didn't need to use them being alive to lure Sydney to the mansion in the end. He could have easily just killed them and then gotten on the phone and used their voices to get Sydney there anyway. So the whole thing of him like faking his death, which really was just kind of put in there for the audience's benefit, not really like Gale's or Sydney's, because in the end, if Gale did survive and Roman ended up killing Sydney, how was he going to explain the fact that he wasn't dead when she saw him dead. Like, do you understand what I mean? Like, he just overcomplicated the plan when he didn't need to. I also don't understand, like, why is he so perturbed? I mean, like, outside of the fact that, like, Maureen didn't want him as a child, his life turned out really good. Like, he's a big-time Hollywood director. Like, it does speak to his psyche that, you know, he would still hold on to this grudge despite, like, all of the rewards that he has in life, but it just makes him seem like a very, like, angry, petulant child, which is, like, kind of like what it comes down to at the end, like, why I don't find him as threatening, at least, like, psychologically, because Sydney is just, like, arguing with him, and he's sitting there like, I don't want to hear it. So yeah, ultimately, I think that I could sum up Roman's success as a killer, and, like, a killer on his own, just by, like, sheer luck. Like, he just got really lucky with a lot of things. In sixth place is Richie Kirsch, and with Richie, a lot of the things that I said about Amber are going to be applied here, just in terms of pros and cons. The reason why I have Richie above Amber and, you know, even Roman in that regard is because Richie has a lot of screen time throughout the movie. He's set up really well to be the boyfriend and the killer in the end. And I think that a lot of that comes down to a really great performance by Jack Quaid. Because even though you could see the cracks throughout, which was totally done on purpose, Richie was just, like, really committed to putting on this charade right up until the last minute. Like, even running down those stairs and making Sydney think that he was getting the gun to save her. I mean, I think it's safe to say that most of us saw that coming a mile away, but just the fact that Richie as a character was still, you know, willing to act that role. But with the cons, and I think that this is kind of like the reason why a lot of people aren't responding to these two killers, is just the fact that it wasn't a surprise. And, you know, it was all presented to us, which, I mean, it is what it is. Personally, I would have liked more of a detective murder mystery and, like, combing through clues rather than just having the evidence be, like, blatantly obvious from the beginning. So I don't know if that's so much a fault of Richie the character, but I can definitely see how it would be applied to, you know, giving him a lower placement, because it does, you know, make him less interesting in the long run. And it's just the fact that, like, their motive is just based on the idea of a toxic fandom, which I don't completely write off. I think that it was actually a really brilliant idea. It, you know, adds a freshness to this killer list, because, you know, we should have killers that, you know, do have different motives outside of just, like, a revenge plot or wanting to get famous. But again, like Amber, I think that it really comes down to the fact that, you know, he was incompetent and, like, really ill-prepared. I think that he really underestimates the strength of the sisters, Sam and Tara. That's kind of his fatal flaw in this movie. And also the fact that, you know, similar to Roman and his plan of framing Sydney, I don't really see how he thought he was going to get away with framing Sam. Because right off the bat, she already has an alibi of being in Modesto with Richie at the time of Tara's attack. So again, they didn't really plan this very well. In fifth place is Jill Roberts. And this is going to be a very contentious placement, I know, because, you know, the last time I did this ranking video, I had Jill at first. And that was never based on, like, personal preference. Jill's never been my favorite. I just thought at the time, based on, you know, what I perceived from Scream 4, is that she was killing all of these people and had a much bigger hand in the entire scheme. So just based on, like, the point system I had given to all of them, she ended up in first because of, like, reasons. I don't dislike Jill as a killer. I actually think that she's really fun, probably the most fun. And I think, like, the thing with Jill is that she is, like, the one true sociopath of all of these killers. Everyone else is, like, kind of psychotic to varying degrees. Jill is, like, completely heartless and just, like, the most evil person of any of these guys. But at the same time, it's very hard for me to take her so seriously, and I don't know if that's because of Emma Roberts or just the fact that she is so ridiculous, because I love everything about her self-mutilation and just being so tenacious right up to the very last moment, like thinking that she could get away with it. And it really reminds me of Cartman from South Park, specifically in this one episode titled Casa Bonita. The entire premise deals with Kyle having his birthday party coming up and only being allowed to invite 3 other friends. And just because Cartman always rags on him all the time, he decides to invite Butters instead. So this pisses Cartman off because, you know, he wanted to go to Casa Bonita and he's willing to do any and everything that he has to get Butter's spot. So he tricks him into hiding in a bomb shelter, and when the entire town is going crazy because there's this missing kid, Kyle now has like no other choice but to invite Cartman because there's now an empty spot. However, at some point on the way to the party, Butters is discovered and inadvertently reveals Cartman's entire scheme. This obviously gets back to the rest of the friends, where it's then revealed that the police are on their way to arrest Cartman. This causes him to panic and do this like entire speed run of the restaurant theme park before the police can come and apprehend him. And this entire sequence of him frantically, trying to get the most out of everything in like the shortest amount of time possible really reminds me of Jill in the hospital at the end of Scream 4. And Sydney says it herself, there is no way out of this for Jill, but Jill is like committed to getting the full experience of, what she had strived for in this like short amount of time. And I think that there is something just so hilarious about that. And once I made that correlation, I couldn't see it any other way. And as I say this all, I know it sounds like it's a negative for Jill, but I actually really love it. I love the fact that Jill has this bit in the movie. In terms of Jill's cons, I mean, yeah, we see that she is really manipulative. She's able to manipulate Charlie, but again, like, why would she not wait until Charlie killed Sydney before she killed Charlie? Like, that just felt like it was one of those things that, especially if she was trying to frame Charlie and Trevor as the ones who killed everyone, it would make the most sense for her to get Charlie to do it. So I don't know if it was like some sort of pathological need to be the one to do Sydney in, but even in that regard, she completely fails at killing her. Because with Sydney, like, surviving, that was absolutely a hiccup in her plan. But I think, like, even if she had successfully killed Sydney, I don't think that there was any way that Jill would ever get away with it because she just talks too much. And, we see this right away where she, has to point out the fact that her and Gail were stabbed in the same spot, which instantly sets off alarm bells for Gail. And I've heard people like argue about this a lot in the comment sections for my channel by saying that, she could have easily said that she heard it from someone at the party, or Charlie could have told her that he stabbed Gail in the shoulder or whatever. That's not the point of it. The fact of the matter is that Jill likes to talk about her plan. And I think that if she didn't say something to like a news outlet that would later be contradicted by something else that she said, and people would start to recognize it, I can just see her as being someone who would like go out to a nightclub with her influencer friends when she's rich and famous and just like telling someone like, hey, you know how I got this way? Because I killed my cousin and, framed some idiots. Like she just has that big of an ego that's what would be her undoing in the end. In fourth place is going to be Stu Macher. I can almost hear the collective sigh of all the Stu fans right now. The thing with me is I think that Stu is a great all-around character, even like just in terms of being the killer. I think that he's probably the most psychologically complex. But I think that like a lot of the traits that I like about Stu aren't really applied to Stu the killer as much as it is just like Stu the character. And that's kind of the thing with him. He's sort of like a killer just because he had nothing better to do. And that does make him really interesting because I feel like there is a lot more that's going on down there. And I think that, just in terms of like how Stu was written by Kevin Williamson, like it was a very two-dimensional, very blank character. And Matthew Lillard obviously brought that to life. So I think that Stu on the paper is like not all that great, but Stu, like the performance and just like everything that we see on the screen is like way up here. Another thing that I find really fascinating about him is that despite the fact that it seems like he's being manipulated by Billy and he's Billy's lapdog, he shows that he has a lot of self-awareness considering his role in the partnership. And I know that it's retconned in Scream 3 when Roman tells Billy to get a partner in case he needs to sell someone out if he gets caught. But even the fact that we do see Billy and Stu actively stabbing each other, it never felt like one was betraying the other. Like it never felt like Billy was going to turn on Stu. So I think just in terms of some of the secondary killers that we've seen, Stu has a lot more autonomy in that partnership. And this is kind of where the cons come in because I think that a lot of people give him credit for being this sort of mastermind. And I don't see that at all. I see him as being more of a simp. So the entire premise that never happened with Scream 3, where Kevin Williamson had written that it was going to be a cult of Ghostface killers who were all being mentored by Stu from prison. I never bought that idea because I can't see Stu as the kind of person who would be doing any of that. If he ever did come back, I see him as more of someone who probably would have like shown to have reformed from his criminal ways, but then, you know, they might have underestimated him at some point and he would have pulled a fast one on them and escaped or something. But I think that if there is really one last con to speak of, it's just the fact that he doesn't feel like a formidable foe for Sydney at all. Even when he came running out of the kitchen for that last scene there, like it always felt like Sydney was in full control. Like she had him by the balls. And, you know, just going back to what I said about Amber and Richie having these like really spectacular death scenes because they underestimated the final girl, that's exactly what happened with Stu, because, you know, we see that he also has a really great death. So all in all, I think that Stu is a great character. I even like him as a killer. I'm glad that he did turn out to be one of the killers. I wouldn't have wanted that any other way. But personally, out of all the reasons that I said, I don't put him in my top 3. So with that said, in third place is going to be Mrs. Loomis. What I think like the biggest strength of Mrs. Loomis is for me is the fact that this was a huge surprise. Debbie Salt was such a peripheral character throughout all of the movie that, you know, I personally never would have thought that she'd turn out to be the killer or even like an important figure within the grand scheme of the movie. So in that regard, I really like the killer hiding in plain sight aspect of her character. A common reoccurring theme with all of these killers is that they don't get away with it in the end. There's usually something that slips them up, and Mrs. Loomis is no different from that. But I think just in terms of like the forethought and everything that went into it, and then just, you know, finding this accomplice in Mickey online who has absolutely no connection to her at all is just like really the best way that you can go about it. Because even if everything went to plan and she was able to kill Mickey and kill Sydney and everyone, she probably would have gotten away with it because it all would have been traceable back to Mickey. There's also just something I really love about Laurie Metcalf's performance here of just like going full on crazy with the bulging eyes and everything. And the irony of like all of this taking place on a theater stage is not lost on me, because I do feel that like Mrs. Loomis is this very like tragic Shakespearean character. And that's another thing that I really love about this killer and this movie in general. You know, I think that a lot of people shortchange Mrs. Loomis because she is a middle-aged woman. And I don't think that that's fair that, you know, any one of these killers should be ranked based on their age or sex. Like, you know, she was able to get a lot done. And, you know, similar to Amber with Dewey, Mrs. Loomis did kill a legacy character. She killed Randy. And, you know, that could be a positive or a negative depending on, you know, which side of that you fall on, but that's a pretty big deal. I think it is a point against her that, you know, that is really the only kill of the movie that she had. But it was more so just like out of the anger of what he had said to her, which set her off and had her killing him in like broad daylight in the van. So that was a very impulsive move. It did work out for her in the end and, you know, made for a spectacular set piece in the middle of the movie. But as we see at the end, like the reason why Mrs. Loomis fails, which I guess is her fatal flaws, the pride that she has as a mother, because that kind of goes in with her monologuing and getting distracted easily by Sydney. So, I mean, similar to like all of these killers, it just comes down to her talking too much. In second place is Billy Loomis. So second and first place are very interchangeable for me. I think it mostly just comes down to preference. I think that Billy is a really strong killer just based on the fact that, you know, he is able to manipulate Sydney. And I don't think that like any of the other killers from 9th to 3rd place were able to do that. And I think with Billy specifically is that he was able to manipulate Sydney on an emotional level. Like he got to her through her heart. And if you look at like the grand scheme of the franchise, like it always comes back to Billy. Like even in the new movie, she says that Billy was the one that started this, even though it was technically Roman. But I look at that as the fact that like Roman, you know, while he might have been a formidable foe, he wasn't the kind of killer who could get under her skin. And I think that with Billy, you know, similar to Richie and just like putting on this act, really sold this part of being the boyfriend right up until like the very last moment. So it became this emotional game really of just like her going back and forth on whether she trusted him or not. And I think that that was completely part of the plan. Like him getting arrested for sneaking into her window when the killer was there, or even faking his death at the end, because it just like put this mindset in her of, is he or isn't he the killer? And when he finally does reveal himself to her, he's already like taken her on this emotional roller coaster to the point where she's not even able to process what's happening because of it. So I think just in terms of understanding his victim, Billy kind of has an edge on all of the other killers who, you know, come before in this ranking. In terms of cons, it's really hard to find anything bad to say about Billy. Like I think that would come down to more so like hypotheticals. Like I feel that like like they had a very solid plan. You know, I feel that they really would have gotten away with it, but I think that what their downfall might have been is the fact that they really like started to get a bloodlust going. Like they had murdered Maureen Prescott the year before, and then they had the 96 murder spree. So I feel that like Billy and Stu probably would have kept it going, and I think that they would have eventually got caught. But since, you know, we never got to see that happen, and it is just a hypothetical, I can't really weigh that as a con. But I think if there is one thing that would like hinder him at all here, it's the fact that he and Stu start stabbing each other before they take out Sydney and her father. I think that really came down to just arrogance and underestimating Sydney again, because, you know, he really thought that he had this one in the bag. So just because like this is a reoccurring theme that we see with all of the killers, I don't think that that should really count as a point against Billy. So technically, if like we are looking at things from a more analytical standpoint, I would say that Billy is the best killer. But just because I am so beguiled by Timothy Olyphant's performance, I have Mickey Altieri in first place. And I know that this is one that the fandom is really split on. Like you either, you know, love him and think he's really underrated, or you hate him because he's not in the movie enough. And for me, it just comes down to the fact that I think he's the most dangerous killer on this list, because I would argue he is the most psychotic. And not even like just being the most psychotic, but the one killer who really has nothing to lose here. We see that in the fact that his entire plan is predicated on him getting caught and going to trial. So for him, he really is able to just detach himself emotionally from everything that's going on here, which I think it's really interesting. And this is a defense I want to make for the cafeteria scene, which everyone moans and groans about. But I think what's interesting with that scene is that it paints Mickey in a light where we see him genuinely happy to be friends with these people. I don't think that he's putting on an act here when he is like getting the crowd riled up to cheer for Derek. And that's what makes him such a cool customer, because he's able to flip off that switch and get down to business and do what he needs to do, because at the end of the day, he can separate himself from all of that because he knows what the task at hand is. And I think that, you know, because he does like Derek and Sydney so much, he's able to manipulate her in a way that nobody else has. And he does that on a very cerebral level by getting not only under her skin, but in her head, and, you know, making her have that whole thought of, you know, is the boyfriend the killer again? And these actions we see have consequences throughout the rest of the franchise, at least really going into Scream 3, where Sydney has now isolated herself off from the rest of the world, mostly due to the psychological trauma that was all from him. I think that what people don't consider about Mickey is that all of his scenes work within the context of who he turns out to be in the end, because we see him constantly planting these seeds. You know, it's stuff like that that might make him more obvious as a killer, but at the same time, like, I prefer that. I want to see killers who make sense in the end. So for me, it just comes down to the fact that, you know, we might not have had a lot of quantity screen time, but we definitely had quality screen time. I also think that he has like the best one last scare out of any of the killers. The one flaw I'll say about Mickey is that he underestimated Mrs. Loomis and was manipulated by her. I just feel like that could be perceived as something that undermines his intelligence in the end. I want to thank my Patreon supporter, Isaac Salazar. If you guys want to check out some more Scream-related content, you can check out either one of these playlists. Until next time, I've been Zach Cherry, and I'll be right back.